Welcome. This is Leonard Lee, Managing Director of neXt. Thank you for joining today's Rethink Webcast. And in this session, we will be discussing how blockchain technology is being leveraged to transform the healthcare and pharmaceutical industries with our special guest, Anca Petre of 23 Consulting. And before we begin, I'd like to introduce neXt. We are a San Diego-based boutique consulting and research firm focused on providing experience-based advisory services to inspire our clients' digital future. And we advise across a wide range of digital topics, drawing from the expertise and experience of our executive consultants and analysts. And today, we're very honored to be joined by Anca Petre, COO of 23 Consulting, a consultancy focused on advising entrepreneurs and healthcare organizations in the application of blockchain technologies across the healthcare industry. I met Anca almost a year ago, right, Anca?
Yes, absolutely.
At the Blockchain Summit in Barcelona. And she was moderating a panel of blockchain entrepreneurs and experts who were addressing various healthcare use cases, such as patient drug administration, or at least that was one of the topics. She is also an accomplished speaker and has presented keynote speeches and moderated numerous panels at blockchain conferences around the world. And Anca has also appeared on TED Talks, speaking on blockchain in the healthcare industry. And it's really fantastic to have you with us today, Anca. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. And today we will cover the following agenda items in our session. First, we will talk about the kinds of problems in the healthcare industry that blockchain is able to solve. Anca will share a use case that illustrates the benefits of blockchain. And second, Anca will share some of her research and perspectives on what entrepreneurs and big healthcare players are doing with blockchain and the types of industry issues that they're focusing in on these early days of blockchain in healthcare. And finally, Anca will share some of the challenges that she has seen the industry struggle with in developing and going to market with their blockchain solutions. She will also outline the important factors in creating a favorable environment for your blockchain project. So let's start with our first agenda topic, shall we? Since the blockchain conference last year, a lot has changed, and we have seen blockchain really hit the spotlight as its hype rode alongside Bitcoin's ascent to its valuation peak in December of 2017. And since then, the promise of blockchain has been tested as an increasing number of pilots have happened in the financial services industry, transportation and logistics. I suppose the diamond supply chain, which is one of the ones that's been in the media quite frequently in the past 6 months. And we're also seeing blockchain being applied in retail with some of the work that Walmart's doing with IBM. And there's been a lot of focus on the healthcare industry as well, as it has been touted as one of the big blockchain hoax. So, Anca, what is it that the healthcare industry is finding interesting about blockchain? And what are the unique capabilities that blockchain offers that is drawing interest from the industry and has gotten so many entrepreneurs excited about the technology?
The interesting thing about blockchain is that really for the first time ever, you can trust the information that is shared across the internet without the need for a third party to authenticate the information. So this is very important because it brings a lot of use cases that can have business value for different healthcare organizations. So the first one I wanted to look at is asset transfer. So the idea here is to create a digital token that represents a real-world asset. So on the blockchain, you can register the initial ownership of the asset and then all the transfers. So this can be particularly interesting when you want to track a product on the supply chain, like diamonds you mentioned before. Tokens, they can also have a monetary value. And this is also very important because you can use them as reward systems for patients if they want to share their medical data or if they want to be adherent to the treatment.
So when you talk about assets, are you referring to both physical and non-physical assets?
Yeah, it can be any type of asset. So it can be, of course, a product down the supply chain, but it can also be data or storage space in a server, for instance. Anything that has value can link it to a token, and it's much easier to transfer a token and to track a token than to track, data that is shared across a network. So the second point I wanted to emphasize is that in healthcare, we need reliable and trustworthy information, of course. There are many critical documents that we want to store securely and protect from any alteration that can happen from, let's say, other practitioners or patients. We want the information not to move. This information can be prescription or clinical trial protocols or medical procedures. And the interesting thing with blockchain is that we can store a proof of existence of any data at any time. And the owner of the information is also stored, and you can make sure that no one can change or delete the information. So if two parties at some point disagree on the state of the information, you just take a look at the blockchain and you see what was recorded, and you have your solution. So this is what I mean when I say that all the critical information that gets linked to litigation, it's each time you have a disagreement, you just check the blockchain because you know that no one was ever able to change the information.
I was wondering what you meant by litigation. Great explanation. Thank you.
So the third problem blockchain can solve is the lack of automated processes. You know that you have a lot of human interaction in healthcare, which is a good thing when it's with patients, but then you have all these administrative procedures that you have to go through, and you can actually automate them with simple technologies. This can be achieved with something that are called smart contracts, which is really just a piece of code that can produce an action when you hit some predefined conditions. So basically, it just works like if a certain condition is breached, then a certain action is produced. So I'll give you an example of that in a couple of minutes, but this is a very powerful tool because once you run it, once you code it, it doesn't stop. So it provides guaranteed execution.
Can you explain guaranteed execution?
Exactly means that. It's that once you code this process, once you code what are the conditions and what are the actions that have to be taken if the conditions are met, then you record it on the blockchain and no one can intervene. It runs automatically. If I provide you with some work and you have to pay me in return, then no matter what happens, I will get paid if you receive the work. No one can do anything about that. So the last problem that blockchain can solve, and it's really a consequence of all the other problems above, is the fact that healthcare information is often shared in silos in healthcare. So each stakeholder has a different database and potentially different information on the same subject, and really no way to agree upon what is the state of the information today. So in a blockchain, we have a distributed ledger across a network where data is only added upon consensus, which means that if everyone agrees on the state of the information at some point, then we upload it on the blockchain. So everyone knows what happens at some point in time.
Okay.
No silos of information.
So do you find that there are regional differences? For instance, in the United States, when you go to a new doctor or you get referred to a specialist, you end up having to fill out your medical history and provide your personal data to them. It obviously isn't shared. To your point, you have these silos, but do you see that the problem of siloed data and having to continually provide the same information to new parties that you're engaging with personally in healthcare, do you find that there are differences? And what are some of the key differences that you see regionally? It
really depends on the country. I think we all struggle with the same problem and forms that we have to fill hundreds of times each time we go see another doctor. There is one country that really stands out on this, is Estonia, which is a small European country close to Russia. What they do there is that they use a blockchain-like system, and they share all the medical information across all stakeholders in healthcare. And the patient can decide who they want to share their information with. So it can be their GP and then some other specialist that they pick. When they share their information, then all the doctors get the info and they don't have to ask for it anymore. And there's this story in Estonia. They said if you are ever asked for the same information twice, is that the system failed. So imagine the number of times we are asked for the same information. That
all the time.
enter data once.
And what oftentimes concerns me is how you have these different parties that have your personal data and you have no idea how securely they're handling it. And then also, I oftentimes find myself personally wanting to withdraw consent. I don't have a relationship with that physician anymore. I don't necessarily want them to have access to my personal medical history or medical records.
Well, I think this is a very complicated situation because you have to see it from both points of view. When you're a patient, of course, you would like to have more control of your information. You don't want to share all your data with all the physicians out there. But then when you're a doctor, you do need all the information to make an informed decision and informed diagnosis. You cannot say, such doctor needs only that part of the information. He doesn't know enough about medicine, let's say, to make this decision of what's relevant and what's not. You have to be very careful when talking about sharing parts of medical information.
Why don't we move on to the use case that you're going to share with us here, Anca?
Yeah, I wanted to share with you this blockchain use case that the whole blockchain and healthcare communities are working on. It basically explains how we can blockchainize the clinical process. So as I mentioned before, data in a clinical trial is very sensitive, and of course, mistakes can have great repercussions on patients, but also on the sponsors and investigators. We've been working for a couple of years now on ways in which we can use blockchain technology to secure clinical trials, especially when it comes to consent, the patient consent. So I'll walk you through the different steps. So the first thing you want to do, of course, is register on the blockchain the version of the protocol that was approved by the regulators, because that's the last version and it's the one that will allow you to, just do your clinical trial. So this is what I mentioned. It is the proof of existence. So it's authenticating information, saying that this protocol existed at that time, and this is the one that we will use for the clinical trial. So if anyone questions the validity of the protocol, you can just prove by looking into the blockchain that this is the one that was approved. And after the protocol is registered, the next step is to collect consent from the patients. Now, the important aspect here is that no consent should be sent out before the protocol is approved and registered, of course. This step can be automated with smart contracts that, for instance, can say, if the protocol approved is registered, then consent forms can be filled out. Because sometimes what you see is that investigators ask for consent when they don't have yet the protocol approved by regulators. And this is not legal. So you can reinforce mechanism with smart contracts. So once the patients sign the consent form, they can be enrolled in the study. Then the investigator also starts collecting data. And this is where we go back to how we can share data, because the patient can specify in the consent the conditions required to access the information. For instance, the identity of the people that can access the information, but also the period of time where they have access to this information. And if the conditions are not met, let's say that a physician wants to access the data after the end of the trial, then a smart contract denies access. And last but not least, if a patient wants to withdraw consent, it also automatically blocks new data from being collected. So all these critical steps, you can put some kind of a lock that are smart contracts that only let you go on to the next step if the previous step was completed.
Oh, interesting. The scenario looks a lot like GDPR compliant privacy policy management.
There are a lot of things in common with GDPR and blockchain. I mean, GDPR requires you to have a ledger, a register for all the do, and guess what? Blockchain is a ledger. So you can use blockchain in a GDPR context. Of course, there are some points where there's the right to be forgotten. A lot of people talk about that. It's something that is mentioned in the GDPR. And a lot of people wonder, how do you do that with blockchain? It is possible. We are working on different solutions to do that. So it's actually a very great tool.
That's interesting. We at neXt, we're addressing that in the telco space, working with some telco vendors as well as telcos and helping them figure out what are some of these GDPR compliant privacy and security services they can provide. So it's an interesting application of blockchain. Even more interesting to see that you're looking to figure out how to leverage blockchain and doing something very similar to what we've been talking about with some other folks. So this is very interesting. I do have a question. So when you talk about these smart contracts, do these contracts also include the patient's personal data or their clinical trial data? Data itself can be pretty bulky. These can be fairly large files or collection of files associated with clinical trials. What is it that you're seeing as far as the extent of the use of these smart contracts in storing records related to a clinical trial?
Is to store proof of existence or part of code that can make a process go easier, but you don't actually store medical records or store the entire protocol on the blockchain. What you store on the blockchain it's like a link to where the actual information is, but you don't store information itself, because that would be very large files and the blockchain very slowly because of that. So you really just store a link. And then if you want to look at the actual file, you just pretty much follow that link and you see where it is.
So Anca, thanks for outlining one of the key blockchain use cases for healthcare. I'd like for you to share with us what you see as the current state of blockchain investments and where you see the innovative energy, if you will, being focused. And so if you don't mind, would you provide us with an overview of what the blockchain landscape looks like for the healthcare industry and where you think things are going?
Yes, of course. Without much surprise, when we look at blockchain initiatives around the world, there are really two big players, the US and the UK. But if you really take a closer look at the industries that startups explore in these countries, you see that it is mainly finance and banking, and also a bit of infrastructure, which is how do you improve technically the blockchain. Only 5% of blockchain startups develop products designed for the healthcare industry. That's a very, very small number. I will explain the reasons for this in just a short while. But before that, I wanted to give you more insight into what the startups that actually decide to explore the healthcare industry do. When you take a look at their activity area, you see that more than half of them, actually 63%, work on projects around patient data. So they look at genetic data from wearables or electronic health records, and most of them want to find ways to allow patients to take control over their data and decide whom they want to share it with. So this is exactly what we were talking about. And it's a really big challenge because today patients don't really have much power over their information. They don't get to decide who they want to share it with. And this question of access to personal data is pretty important now because we had the whole Facebook scandal. Blockchain companies try to be anti-Facebook in the way that they approach data. So this is on the startup side. And then when you look at more traditional players like pharma companies, governments, healthcare providers, you really see similar interests. In this graph, I represented the degree of progress of specific use cases. And you can see that most of them are past the discovery stage, and they are currently building proof of concepts, especially around drug traceability and consent management, like you've seen before. And what I call patient data are all the applications that deal with medical information. This has reached implementation because of Estonia, and this is the example that I gave before, that they have all their medical information on the blockchain.
Okay. And can you cite any other progressive implementations or pilots that are happening in the patient data arena? Is it just Estonia? Is everyone else struggling with getting these types of blockchain solutions up for their healthcare industry, or are there others that you think are promising or on the horizon?
So when you look at it from a country level, I think Estonia is really years ahead of everyone else. But then when you look at companies, startups building solutions, from those 63% that look at patient data, a very, very small minority actually have real projects that are ready to go into production. And one of the companies that we are very impressed with called Emblema, they are a company that does precisely that, which is, allow the patient to have control over the information that he or she has, and also share it with research centers or pharmaceutical companies and get rewarded for that. And this is really a very advanced example that we get in the startup world.
Probably about 90% or more of the blockchain ventures will eventually fail and die off, with a handful of projects seeing the light of day. I suppose Estonia is a good example of one for the healthcare industry. But among those few, maybe 2 or 3 projects will bring the blockchain promise to the industry in a transformative way. One of the things I'm interested in asking you, Anca, is what do you think are some of the key barriers and challenges that you see these blockchain projects struggle with? Because there's these projects that are out there that are really not poised to go live at any point in the near future. Obviously, these ventures are having trouble. And then the other thing that I want to ask you is, what are some of the success factors that blockchain projects need to factor into their strategy, their planning, their execution to increase the probability of success?
So we identified 4 big challenges that we often see when we talk to our clients, and all of them can actually be turned into opportunities to really advance much faster. But the most important challenge, I think you can guess, is the lack of awareness and understanding of what is blockchain and why should we care. And most people give up very easily because the technical explanation is very complex. That's why there's no technical explanation in this presentation. But business leaders, they must see beyond that and look at the business value, the opportunities that it offers, and the impact it will have in the industry. And they need to get involved in the projects, gather people with various areas of expertise, and really build an ecosystem willing to support the projects, because tech people are not going to do it by themselves, and business
Right.
do them by themselves either. So people really have to work together. This is precisely what is beginning to happen right now in healthcare organizations that unite forces and work with consortiums to build a very strong environment.
And that's one of the things that I've noticed, even at the blockchain summit in Barcelona, and since then, is there is such a lack of clarity on what blockchain is, right? It often gets conflated with Bitcoin. Even in the last 6 months, there's many folks who have come on industry media talking about their points of view on blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and you see a lot of conflict. There isn't a consistency in their understanding. So I can clearly see this being a big problem.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is the biggest misconception about blockchain, is not knowing the difference between blockchain and Bitcoin. Two very different things. In everything that I've mentioned so far, there's no Bitcoin anywhere. So you do blockchain without ever considering Bitcoin.
Well, I think that's a great starting point. You really shouldn't start off with blockchain, much less Bitcoin. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah, definitely. I think people should start with their pain point and then see what technology that's and not start from Bitcoin. So the second challenge, which is very much linked to the first one, is the lack of education and correct understanding of the technology. And this is important because, as we have seen earlier, blockchains can only be used in precise situations. There were 4 of them earlier, and it's really critical to identify those situations. Otherwise, you're going to use a technology that's not well suited for your problem, and it's just going to be, spending money on a project that's not the right answer to your question. So blockchain is definitely not the miracle solution for everything in healthcare. And really getting educated on the real value of the technology, the precise use cases, and the ways in which it should be implemented can really make a difference.
Couldn't agree more. I think fit for purpose is a very important criteria that you need to apply in considering the use of blockchain.
Yes.
And you're absolutely right. That requires that you understand what blockchain is functionally, I think, more than technically, because once you get down to the technical level, it just gets really confusing for most people, especially if you have a business background and you're non-technical.
Yes. So if we move on to the legal challenges, I think those are by far the most difficult to tackle because you're not going to change the legislation. This point has really two sides to it. The first one is that it is really important to take into account the legal context before starting a project. Otherwise, it will just stay at the stage of proof of concept and you will never go into production because you haven't taken into account all the regulation and all the things that you need to know that are specific to your industry. And we really see way too many companies experimenting on use cases that, first of all, don't reflect their pain points, but they are completely disconnected from the regulatory environment. So those are the mistakes that companies really have to avoid. And the second aspect of this point is that healthcare companies usually take existing regulation and then define a set of guidelines to explain how to apply the regulation in their context. For now, these guidelines and standards, they do not include blockchain. But because blockchain can be a good solution for a lot of pain points, a lot of problems, it can be interesting to redesign the standards and the guidelines using blockchain. And this work to define new standards and new guidelines is really what we should focus on, because once blockchain appears in those standards, then everyone will use it. And this is a very hard way to accelerate blockchain because it's not really easy to define new standards, but I think that's really how it should be done. Last but not least, we have like any young technological challenges, but I don't want to spend too much time talking about this because there are very skilled developers out there working on great ways of improving the technology and making it easier to use for different business scenarios. And I think this is one of the main challenges, is that using blockchain doesn't have to be, just lines of code. It should be something that is easier to use for the business environment.
Do you find that some of these projects are struggling to find technical folks? Because that's what I'm hearing across the board, that it's very challenging to find developers that really understand the technology and are able to serve as a resource for some of these projects.
Yeah, so our technical team always says that a blockchain project is never a blockchain project. Because you use blockchain, but you use a lot of other tools. So the hard part here is not finding people that know how to code a blockchain, because a lot of developers can do that. But the hard part is to find people that know blockchain and also know a lot about other tools that you can use in IT. This is very hard because you ask for someone to have 10 years of experience on a technology that's very recent.
Yeah, I love that. Probably 5 people in the world that have 10 years of experience with blockchain technology.
Right. There is a gap between the expectations and what actually you can find on the market.
Well, that's consistent with what we're hearing. This has been a great discussion, Anca. And for our audience, what are 5 things that you want them to walk away with from this discussion?
I think there are 5 key ideas that are very important, especially for business leaders. And I'm not going to talk about anything technological or technical here. The first one is what is the value proposition of this technology? And it is that for the first time, it can bring trust in the information that is shared within a network. So you don't have to question where it comes from and why is it there. It's trust by design. Then the second one is that education is essential to correctly identify use cases and understand the business value. And this is everything that we've been talking about, correctly identifying the pain points and having a team of experts that can take you all the way from education to implementation.
Are you finding that a lot of the more successful projects and project teams have a multidisciplinary background? They're not just technical, right? They're going to bring in other types of experience as well as knowledge and competencies.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And this might sound funny, but a lot of healthcare companies using blockchain in healthcare have no healthcare experts. And this is a huge problem because, it's like asking fashion designers to build airplanes. It's just not their job. So
yeah, that's surprising to hear.
People with the right skills to take you on projects like this. Yes, so the third point is to experiment with proof of concepts, to have real feedback and then adjust the development strategy. I think this is very important because as fast as possible, you have to test your solution, because this is the only way to know if it works and if it makes sense in the environment that you work in.
Now, is this something that you recommend to startups and some of the big players?
No, I think this is for more traditional companies that already have their business models, that already have their business, and they're looking to improve some of their processes or create new value with blockchain. It's really important to test their idea as fast as possible. But of course, startups do that by design because they do things very, very fast and they tend to test it very fast. But you don't have to wait to have the perfect product. And this goes for big companies as well as startups before testing it and before releasing it into the market. So the fourth point is to participate in consortiums to evaluate blockchain in healthcare and make informed decisions. Why do I say that? Because the biggest advances that we've seen in this industry come from consortiums. When companies work together with regulators and with all the different stakeholders, this is when you come up with a solution that actually makes sense in the industry. And it's really important to take part in these working groups. And last idea is think outside the box, because this is a disruptive technology and using it just to optimize existing models is not enough. And this technology really calls for disruptive applications. The last message.
I couldn't agree with you more. Going back to your first point, this is a technology that people still struggle understanding. And with that challenged understanding comes a lack of understanding of what the potential of that technology is. As you've laid out here, you really need to understand the nature of the disruptive technology before you can really start to think outside of the box and then come up with these applications that are going to create new possibilities. And I think that's a very important point.
Yeah, I always say optimize first and disrupt later.
Thank you so much, Anca, for sharing your insights and thoughts to our audience. That was a great set of takeaways that you provided us. It was great having you today, and I'm looking forward to our future collaborations and having you join us on another Rethink session in the near future. If you would like to find out more about NextCurve's points of view on this and other digital topics of the day, go to our website. It's www.next-curve.com, where you'll find research notes, media, and replays of this and other webinars that we've done in the past. And we're also on Twitter and YouTube. And we recently launched our iTunes podcast channel. Subscribe and you can take NextCurve on the road with you. Listen to us while you're working out or as you're running through the airport trying to make your connection. Anca, could you please introduce us to 23 Consulting and some of the great work that you're doing with your teams and what 23 Consulting is doing to promote blockchain-enabled transformation in the healthcare industry?
Sure. So 23 Consulting developed a method to take healthcare stakeholders from first learning about blockchain all the way to implementing a project. So we call that the education, ideation, implementation method. And we are the leading blockchain consulting firm dedicated to the healthcare industry. And we are very proud because we work with great experts in their field that can help out with any questions our clients might have. And we also entered various international working groups because, as I mentioned, these consortiums are really very important. First of all, because we want to learn from what others have done, but also because we can bring our expertise to the table. So this is a very exciting environment. And if any of you want to get involved, feel free to reach out.
You can follow Anca and 23 Consulting via their website. It's www.23consulting.com, as well as follow them on Twitter at 23_consulting. And if you would like to contact NextCurve to find out more about our digital advisory and executive coaching services, contact me by email or telephone for a scoping discussion. And you can contact Anca if you would like to find out more about the great things that she's doing with 23 Consulting, and her contact information is provided here as well. With that, thank you everyone for attending. I also wanted to once again thank Anca for joining us today. Thank you so much. And we're looking forward to doing it again soon.
Thank you.